Hello, everyone. One more time. And in fact, our last episode, essay at number 13, is called Time. There's one thoughtful question here, which I shall address in a few moments, and otherwise I'll read straight on through. And after that, a very short concluding essayette with the title Opera as Opera, which amounts to a précis of the whole series. So I'll read that as well with a brief response to one final question, and then leave you with a few parting thoughts till our next meeting at the book club. Time. There is, first, the displacement of time inherent in all performance. When we consent to the performance encounter, we enter into a bargain concerning time. We agree to substitute the psychological time of the performance for real time. Indeed, we seek this substitution and in exchange cede to the performers control over the ordering of time. This substitution of performance rhythm for life rhythm lends us the sense of an event taking place outside time and therefore not leading toward death. If there is no time, we will never arrive at death. For this purpose, it does not matter if the performance is experienced as fast or slow, whether the work is an hour-long life celebration or a 6-hour meditation on mortality. To be sure, the psychological experience of time is illusory. Exactly the same amount of real time passes as otherwise would. But the illusion can be salutary. This imposture of immortality can be stimulating, rejuvenating to our beings. That is why we seek the bargain and want to believe in the world of performance. To believe unreservedly is to be immortal for a while. Real time passes. The inexorable deterioration of our bodily selves continues, but during performance it does not continue as usual. The sensory stimuli of performance affect our respiration, our pulse. They affect peristalsis and glandular secretion, the rhythm of every inner movement. They probed the sources of emotion. Returned to the flow of time, and therefore once again mortal, we nonetheless recognize that our inner selves are in a different place, positioned at a different angle, and that this difference would not have come about in the real time of real life. Perhaps that was the reality, the performance. Perhaps we were more authentic, more ourselves there and then than here and now. If so, time has suffered a defeat. Its wasteful drainage, the spillage that haunts us with the awareness of time expended without difference, has been staunched. Opera time is like no other. It is most evidently musical time, and as such, presents the same problems of the relationships among musical materials and time's passage as does all music. These include debates over the interpretation of meter and tempo, as well as our attempts to explain the presence or absence of movement in performance, why rhythmic life seems to come and go, why a longer performance can seem quicker than a shorter one. It also invites exploration of the tension between musical ideas and structure, of the density of musical substance within a time period, and of the distribution of vertical information, harmonic, timbral, along a horizontal axis, melodic, rhythmic. But opera time is also drama time. This has two aspects. The first involves the decisions made by creators and interpreters as to the variations of time that will most effectively generate the dramatic events of character actions, scenes, and the arc of the work as a whole. The second concerns the time frame proposed by dramatic style of the piece, which can extend from the examination of the contents of a few minutes to the span of lifetimes or generations, or to the non-sequential treatment of linear time. And here I'll pause for a question in the previous paragraph, which comes from Steve. Quote, At first blush, this consoling aspect of performance time would seem to lull us, perhaps desensitizing us to the experience of drama, conflict, and life and death emotional experience. Or does it work in the opposite way, providing a safe space for us, with our own anxieties about death temporarily relieved, to explore the emotional trials and conflicts of others? I think both might happen. The former, usually in the case of a trial of a performance, where we sit there thinking, my God, who cares? Die already. And a sort of anti-empathy sets in. I suppose I connect the lulling effect more with something that is unadulterated entertainment, whose whole point is to pass time enjoyably without a problem to worry our pretty little heads. Perhaps opera can be rather treacherous in that respect. One, because creators, no matter how noble and profound their aims, recognize the need to keep us entertained till they slip in the noble, profound parts. And two, because they have music at their disposal. And with many works, it's quite possible to soak up the lovely music or be overwhelmed by its power, just as sensory experience. And then, quite late in the game, be reminded that, oh, right, she dies, or, oh, yeah, he shoots himself, which is, I think, the reason that as the art form matured, composers tended to expunge what we might call the gratuitously entertaining parts, or anything smacking of divertissement, or at least to make sure that they were part and parcel with the progress of the serious drama. But great opera, well performed, works mostly, I'm quite sure, in the second way suggested by Steve, allowing us to safely participate in the enactment of human problems, emotional predicaments that we all recognize and that are forever relevant. To be really involved with them more intensely than we are in our real lives, except at those lives' absolutely defining moments, and yet survive. We are caught up, immersed, and then released. Take the ultimate example of that sort of involvement, Tristan und Isolde, an opera that, at least in one plausible interpretation, embraces a truly disturbing primal idea, namely, that the irresistible pull of love and the equally irresistible drive toward death are actually one and the same thing. And such is the inexorable progress of the music that, if you are on the wavelength, it forces you to feel that, to acknowledge it for the duration. So you live with that experience. And now Tristan's horrible sufferings end in death. And with Isolde, there's a sort of in memoriam transcendence at the close, which you connect to whatever beliefs or unformed feelings you have about that. But now it's over. You're still alive, like Scrooge awakening from his shattering but transforming Christmas Eve dreams, and perhaps you are in some measure also transformed, or perhaps not. But in any event, you have had a deep experience, and now your own life goes forward with that experience embedded in you to make of what you will. Something like that happens, though in only a few cases with quite that penetration, in all the masterworks, by far the majority of them, that take the tragic form. We have others live our life and death and love conflict for us. We're in a sort of godlike relation to those enactors, which is what I meant by calling us temporarily immortal. In the comedies, those same human predicaments, though not hovering quite as close to the abyss, and perhaps suggesting to us that we don't have to go quite to the edge of the abyss to have a meaningful life. But think of Don Giovanni, which does take us exactly there and then pulls us back, are worked through and resolved within the societal framework, and thus release us with a different feeling, with the uplifting thought that conflicts can be mediated and the life of the community can go forward. And the music will make us feel that that is true, though we can ask ourselves afterward if we agree, or if we think the working out of the problems was plausible or wise, earned or not. In any case, whatever we felt along the way, and whatever span of stage time has passed, we are here, and it's about 11:25. Those lives fade, leaving their residue, and our own resume in real time. And now I'll return to the essay itself. In opera, the rise and fall of dramatic action, the pace at which scenes are played, the building of dramatic tension and its release, the location of significant events or turning points within scenes, are structured into the time values of the music. These values are, in fact, meant to fulfill those dramatic necessities. But there is always an uneasiness in the relationship between dramatic structure and musical form, and this uneasiness is about the progression of time. Even in musical settings that are conceived as realistic, where sung conversation and its orchestral commentary are meant to proceed naturally, unquote, the melodic, harmonic, and rhythmic devices of music take on lives of their own, with their own needs for closure. And of course, most operatic writing does not adhere to a strictly realistic style. Formally, two of the most important differences between opera and spoken theater are time-related. One lies in music's capacity for creating the sense of time's compression or expansion during the action, or even evoking the passage of time between action sequences. The other lies in music's vertical dimension, which makes feasible the presentation of simultaneous or overlapping dramatic actions and intentions, made comprehensible through the music. In spoken theater, dramatic action can certainly be overlapping and simultaneous, sometimes in subtle and complex ways. But the irreceivable portion of it, the inflected verbal text, must for the most part be laid out in linear sequence. Actions must alternate. Time must pass. Nonverbal character behavior that suggests meaning beneath the text or even contrary to it, or that shows characters in simultaneous independent or conflicting action, must be tracked by the eye. This is also the case in everyday life, and that is one of the reasons we generally regard spoken theater as the most realistic of the stage arts. In everyday life, the eye can scan a room full of people engaged in conversations and activities, and with sufficient perspective, can summarize the overall situation. It can also identify the activities and characterize the tone of certain interactions. The ear can detect the atmospherics of the gathering as a whole, but the actual subjects and intentions of the conversations, the real content of the interactions, can be determined only by separating them and following them by ear in linear fashion. That is how spoken theater is obliged to present them. Opera transcends this obligation. It is able to present with clarity the simultaneity of independent or conflicting actions and intentions, even when denotative meaning is lost. As already noted, it is able to expand a moment and freeze the outward appearance of reality to examine the inner lives of its characters, to express everything that is being thought and felt. While the horizontal dimension of its music carries the receptor all the way from freeze frame to fast forward and charts the progress of moments, its vertical dimension stacks the emotional and psychological content of the passing time. Individual strands stand in relief or meld with the texture. The private and public, the individual and the social, coexist in their full realities, together in time. Despite this capacity for expanding moments and thus slowing or even suspending the passage of time, opera observes the general theatrical practice of conflating time. That is, the presumed time of the work as a whole is, almost without exception, greater than that of the performance's duration. Opera time is a series of expansions and suspensions within a conflation. Its action is accordion-like. Thus, the receptor outlives the characters, takes in their lives whole with but a minor expenditure of his own, yet experiences crucial moments of those lives with a surreal intensity and depth. All this depends on music's unique capacities for organizing events in time and is received by the ear. That is an essential difference between opera and dance. Dance also has music time and drama time, and a vertical dimension that transcends the sequential requirements of verbal expression. But dance characters are silent. They lead lives of rhythmic movement in space, and that must be tracked by the eye. Dance is eye-led, ear-confirmed. Only in opera do the characters make music. Only in opera are both music time and drama time essentially ear time. So those are my thoughts about time. Now to the summation in number 14, Opera as Opera, which just takes us through about one sentence per essay with the kernels of the thoughts that have presented in them as we have gone through them. Opera as Opera, a summary. Opera is theater through song. Its theatrical form is drama, the theater of conflict. It is nothing without belief, but belief must always be challenged. Its life is in performance. Performance is a chain of encounter involving engagement and distance, a successive transfer of energies from creators to interpreters to receptors. Each link of the chain is both creative and interpretive, but the chain is also a hierarchy, defined by the boundaries of fields of choice. Through performance, texts become works, living organisms whose meanings reside and change in the minds and hearts of receptors. Opera's basic unit of expression is the vocalized word note, which embraces its own verbal content while transcending it by musical means. Its central interpreter is the singer-actor, who embodies the drama's characters and can alone vitalize the word notes. Conductors and directors, interpreters in chief with various degrees of conceptual authority and differing attitudes toward it, are also extremely important to the form as it has developed. The former, that is the conductors, it should be noted, are themselves performers, the latter, the directors, not. Opera guides its receptors on its ear-led, eye-confirmed way through a unique ordering of psychological time. It induces in its devotees an especially intense and complex quality of engagement. Opera is not an amalgam of other forms, but only itself, opera as opera. Time now to examine some living specimens, and that, of course, is what the book goes on to do. And the dubious honor of the very last question in our series is from Jennifer, and it reads, quote, "Your definition of opera, both here and throughout, seems like it would also include the genre that we call musical theater. Is that intentional? How do you think about the relationship between these genres?" Unquote. First, remember that my definition was intended to capture the art form's essence, which I think can be a helpful thing in terms of drawing some distinctions, but which leaves plenty of room for elaboration on it with respect to opera's evolution into its present grown-up identity. That includes everything about the ways operas have been written and performed, which are many and various, But these many and various ways have one overriding thing in common, and that is that they all sing in the language of classical music, whichever dialect of that language is prevalent at a given time and place, and make their own contributions to the development of that language. That includes the ways it's sung, the vocal usages that are shaped by these classical dialects. And in regard to that, I see the relationship between opera and contemporary musical theater, at least here in America, as distant and receding as we speak. This wasn't always true, because the American musical initially grew out of European light opera or operetta models. Victor Herbert, Rudolf Friml, Sigmund Romberg, Jerome Kern, all essentially in the Viennese line of descent and basically sentimental, with some parodic attitude taken now and then from English and French models, primarily Gilbert and Sullivan and Offenbach. In terms of both their composition and their performance, these were all classically derived, but conceived as entertainment and consequently less complex and technically demanding, and with a significant component of spoken book scenes. Again, the model was Austro-German from Singspiel. Now, many other influences came in, including African-American, Jewish Tin Pan Alley, comic elements pulled up from vaudeville, and so on. But basically, it was this European light opera line of descent that gave rise to the American musical. And that framework held in place into the early 1960s, I'd say. But then we had the advent of rock, the elevation of dance, not purely as a supporting decorative element, but as a principal storytelling vector, and no longer necessarily ballet-derived, the birth of the triple threat performer, at first for economic reasons, separate chorus and dance units being no longer affordable by commercial for-profit standards, but then accepted as an actual artistic virtue, and perhaps most importantly, amplification, and the vocalities valorized thereby. So for 60 years or so, opera and what we call musical theater have drifted apart to the point of estrangement, of very little use to each other. At least that's how it seems to me. With that, we have arrived at the end of our series, and I'll leave you with a couple of closing thoughts. But first, I must express appreciation to Bel Canto Bootcamp for extending this invitation, to Rochelle, Steve, and Jennifer for their terrific questions, to Derek Goff for his technical prep and improvements on the producing end, and to my wife, Molly Regan, for her help with tech and prep on this end. And of course, to all of you for watching and listening, video being an eye-led, ear-confirmed medium. We've covered quite a bit here, and as I'm sure you have noticed, have returned to the same considerations several times, because the essayists have given rise to certain questions, and the questions have returned us to those considerations from different points of view. When I say in my book that the masterworks of opera are not before us, I mean that literally. The underlying reasons are two. First, the prevalent mode of production is autoristic, in the contention between the belief that the creators of a work own the prerogative for setting the boundaries for its interpretation, versus the belief that interpreters-in-chief have the prerogative of radically shifting those boundaries and, in effect, writing the work anew, unquote, and between the contention that an artwork should strive to maintain its integrity, to search for agreement among its elements, versus the argument that the artwork has no integrity, save perhaps one imposed on it by an interpreter-in-chief, and that its elements may or even should proceed in independent, often opposed directions. The radical boundary shifters and the disintegrators of works are very much in the ascendancy. That is an unhealthy and artistically unethical state of affairs. The second reason for the masterwork's concealment is the decline of singing, not with respect to musicianship or intelligence or diligence, but with respect to sheer vitality, sustained sonority, and individuality of expression. With very few exceptions, it sounds schooled and guarded, not quite opened up. I discuss some of the technical aspects of this in the book and write about it frequently in my blog. This is no secret to longtime observers. In fact, there is general agreement among them about it. So the one factor that might rescue the ear from what the eye is taking in and restore some of opera's working balance is available only rarely. The problem is systemic. I doubt that any significant movement on these twin problems will come from above or from our major institutions, educational or professional. I think it will have to come from performers themselves. That's hard, I grant, because one has to make a living. And the bosses on the docks at the morning shape-up who will decide who gets the jobs that day are the people responsible for the current state of affairs. Notwithstanding that, I still say that performers declaring their own freedom and recognizing the power they actually hold, coming together to find their own way and create an operatic theater centered on performance, represents the best hope for a revival of this great body of work of which we get only fleeting glances. There's something in the book about that too, in a chapter called The Dream On Company. All right, everyone, thanks again. I hope to see many of you at our September 26th book club discussion. Details on this site.